and the Federation. And there are some issues that mandated or prompted the privatization or commercialization of NNPC. We'd like to look at the context that justified the transformation of NNPC from NNPC owned by government, still owned by government, that is serving the government, to now being NNPC Limited, that is profit motivated. Some of the issues are inefficiencies, mismanagement, and interferences. There are a lot of political interferences with the NNPC before the commercialization. There were a lot of ambiguities and corruption that have been alleged around the NNPC. There were a lot of allegations around funds diversions, some unaccountable importation of petrol. People were reported to have been paid money for importing nothing. Most of the government corruption in the past were related to NNPC. There were a lot of cases of nepotism and low performance, and that led to so much losses and inefficiency of the NNPC. And that's why in 44 years, NNPC had not reported any profit until the year 2020. And nobody cares, even though NNPC was serving some government purposes, especially paying for the subsidy and funding some government projects. Another issue that led to the NNPC commercialization is inadequate funding and revenue. Especially for the upstream operations, we have not seen improvement in terms of investment in the upstream sector. There were a lot of outstanding obligations for NNPC that have not paid, and NNPC was not able to raise its potential revenues. And especially in the downstream sector, there were a lot of scarcities and inconsistencies with the pricing regime in the country. NNPC's low performance, especially in the produce 10% of the crude oil we produce in Nigeria. And that's just 200,000 barrels per day. NNPC spent a lot of money on maintenance and recurrent expenditure. Debt. NNPC owed private companies amount which was estimated around $7 billion as of 2019. And which means that private companies were more effective than the NNPC. And foreign debt. Nigeria keep borrowing money, NNPC could not feed and fund government projects. We still import more petrol, more than any other thing in Nigeria. Our largest import is petroleum. Between 2013 and 2017, we imported petrol worth $36 billion, a country that produced crude oil and the largest gas reserve in Africa. We don't have enough local refining capacity or operation, and researchers have blamed all this because of the government ownership or interference with the NNPC management. And there are a lot of threats or issues around transition from oil to renewable energies. And because of all these reasons, we need to maximize the available petroleum resources so that we can prepare ourselves for the next transition and fix these issues. And hence the idea for commercializing the NNPC. Whether NNPC is said to be privatized or commercialized, this comes down to terms and operation. Privatization of national oil companies is a global phenomenon. Privatization of oil companies, whether wholly or partly. But if you look at the example of Petrobras that was just been mentioned, the Petrobras, the one in Brazil, is only 27% owned by the government. The Aramco that is in Saudi Arabia is 94% owned by the government. But you can imagine, because of the big nature of the shares of the Aramco, that even 4% of the shares is worth around $80 billion. Even BP is a private-owned company. Countries that have fully or partly privatized their national oil companies include countries like Canada, France, Mexico, Russia, Argentina, and so many of them. All right, if you look at this chart, we studied almost 20 countries and see how they moved from 100% ownership by the government to private ownership. We've seen so many companies, we look at so many companies that have been privatized or partly privatized. So it's there on the slides. So NNPC commercialization, what does it mean by the term commercialization? It means that the NNPC will be by itself and will be driving towards profit, but giving to the government, not to the shareholders. Perhaps in the future, NNPC will be open for private shareholders because the PIA allows the NNPC Limited to sell its shares in the future, so that individuals can buy shares in the NNPC Limited. There are a lot of similarities between commercialization and privatization. One of the things that makes them common is profit. They are all geared toward profit and no direct government intervention. And NNPC Limited is 50% owned by the Ministry of Finance and 50% by Ministry of Petroleum. So it's not owned by the Federation, it's owned by the ministries of the federal government. The idea of PIA and privatizing or commercializing NNPC is to spare resources and generate the same resources for energy transition. Now we have crude oil. Crude oil will go out of fame. It will be displaced. By which fuel? Might be natural gas, might be renewable, who knows? But what we know for sure is that the future will not continue going to be dominated by oil. That is going to be the next fuel. Now we have abundance of natural gas and crude oil. We have to maximize it now. Utilize the natural resources we have before it goes out of fame. We don't have to wait for oil to be scarce or to be exhausted before we move to the next fuel. Coal was not exhausted before oil came and took over. So we had to build alternatives. And that's why PIA focuses so much on building natural gas as a transition fuel for Nigeria. And that's why there were a lot of regulations and incentives to support natural gas. Because with natural gas, we can get $18 billion annually for our domestic economy. But we are losing this potential. So NNPC Limited is to allow us to have resources to invest in the future. And that's why Section 64 of the PIA stipulates that NNPC Limited is to engage in the development of renewable resources in competition with private sectors. Nigeria has scored very low in terms of its transition readiness by the World Economic Forum, which scored Nigeria at 35%. So, but before we transit, we need to maximize the available resources, and it had to start from the upstream. And NNPC Limited is our reliable hub at the moment. But NNPC is coming at a time when there is low investment in the upstream sector. Some companies are divesting from Nigeria. In the past 11 years, international oil companies have divested 26 oil mining leases in Nigeria, which are all in Niger Delta. And the amount, if we are to put this in figures, will be around worth 20 trillion naira of divestment. Shell has a plan to divest about $2.3 billion in assets. Eni's asset divestment is around $5 billion. ExxonMobil will also offload $15 billion in assets to the major players who are currently controlling over 45% of Nigeria's oil production assets, they are now leaving Nigeria. So, which company are we left with? NNPC is coming to fill the vacuum, to fill the gap, to be that big giant in the country. And they are divesting from the onshore and shallow water asset despite the reduced taxes and royalty rates in the PIA. They don't care, even if you reduce the taxes, the hydrocarbon tax, whatever tax you are reducing, they are leaving the country. Most of them, they are going offshore because of some absence of some taxes offshore. And Nigeria, we are not able to fulfill our OPEC quota of 1.8 million. We are allowed to produce 1.8 million barrels in a day, but how much do we produce now? We are producing far less than that, around 1 million barrels in a day. In 2011, we were producing 2.5 million barrels per day. This has shown the drastic reduction in production. There are two possibilities now. Now, international oil companies are leaving Nigeria. Some international investors will not come because why Shell, why Total is leaving Nigeria? So that's a negative sign. It could be positive so that our local companies will now step up and buy these assets, and then we control our resources, we produce our resources. So these are opportunities for local companies, even though the Naira challenge is a big issue that stops most of local companies from acquiring these dollar-valued assets. NNPC Limited is also coming at a time when the volume of production is low and the cost of production in Nigeria is high, so it's coming at a very difficult time. But now let's look more in-depth into the NNPC Limited. First, I will say NNPC Limited is coming as a relief to the government because government has been maintaining and managing the NNPC thus far. And now it's profit-motivating company, and it's also only providing services to the government. Any service that NNPC renders must be paid by the government, and is 100% owned by the federal government. Annual profit of NNPC will be shared 80-20. 80% to the shareholders, and 20% of the NNPC Limited will be retained within the NNPC Limited for its own growth. So it's only the shareholders of NNPC will collect or receive profit from NNPC. So there will be what we call the dividend to the shareholders. This could be the company income tax, this could be the hydrocarbon tax, or royalty, crude that will be collected from NNPC. These ones will still be coming, some of them annually and some of them monthly, to the FAAC. And tax on the NNPC profits, of course, will also be going to the FAAC. But that's going to be only annual, and it will be higher due to the expected increase in NNPC's efficiency, because there is no extravagance, because there's going to be efficiency. NNPC profit is going to be higher, and therefore the tax on NNPC profit will also be higher. So we can only expect higher taxes from NNPC, but not getting interest or sharing the profit from NNPC. NNPC will be responsible for lifting all the crude oil produced in Nigeria by the federal government or for the federal government, be it from the joint ventures, petroleum sharing contract, or service contracts. NNPC will own all the crude oil produced, the crude oil profit crude that is raised or generated from joint ventures. And this is something that we might discuss during our conversation. Why will NNPC take 100% of the profit that comes from joint ventures? This is a very, I think, valid point to take further. However, NNPC cannot take the crude oil that was generated as profit crude oil that is generated from petroleum sharing contract. NNPC will still lift those profit oil, but will hand it over to the upstream commission. The upstream commission will now send that money to the federation accounts. Royalty crude. NNPC cannot take royalty crude coming on monthly basis. When it comes to petroleum supply, what is going to change? NNPC Limited, according to the PIA, will still be the supplier of last resort for the government at a cost to the government. NNPC Limited is responsible for keeping reserve and ensuring security of supply, but at a fee to the government. All petroleum importation will be done by NNPC Limited, being a limited company, which is an indication that we have not fully deregulated the petroleum sector. PIA stipulated that 100%, there should be 100% regulation of the sector. In fact, there should be price deregulation 6 months of the PIA. In fact, price deregulation must come before NNPC Limited at a discounted price. The gap, the NNPC will still pay for that and will charge the government. NNPC is not clear about whether they want to inherit the refineries or not, because the refineries have been redundant, not producing any fuel. As much as you want to take the asset, you have to take the liabilities. NNPC is not clear whether they want to take refineries or not. But this can have a direct effect to the Federation account, because if NNPC takes up these refineries, we might get some additional taxes and revenues from them, and we might get some local productions because NNPC will find a way to make them working. Still talking about the subsidy and the Federation account, there were so many varying reports about how many liters we consume daily in Nigeria. One of the popular reports I read saying about 66 million naira loses value. And this is affecting the Federation account because we are paying more for subsidy and then we are sending less to the Federation account. So any subsidy is eating a lot from the Federation account. NNPC has not remitted money to the Federation account because of subsidy. So many years. Nigeria has paid 2 trillion naira to offset subsidy payment in 7-month period in this year alone. 2 trillion naira. And this money will be deducted, the federal government will be charged for that. And I look at this subsidy and oil revenue figure. You can see almost more than 60 and 70% of oil revenue goes for paying subsidies. In the last 20 years, we spent 16 trillion naira paying for subsidy. With this money, we could have built, go back to the table. We could have built a refinery that has a capacity of 1 million barrels in a day. And we have lost this because we've been paying subsidy. And subsidy budget is increasing every year. When we did energy consumption auditing, we discovered that this subsidy payment is because of increasing consumption in some areas in Nigeria. We discovered that Lagos is one of the biggest consuming locations in Nigeria, Southwest particularly. Abuja and Northwest. Northwest is largely because of the arbitrage. People are taking Nigeria's oil and selling it in other countries. Someone was coming from Ghana yesterday, was telling me that Nigeria's subsidized fuel is sold in Ghana. The price of liter in Ghana is more than 1,000 naira per liter. So people are coming here to buy our subsidized petrol, take it somewhere else and make profits. And that's why how much liters we are subsidizing is increasing every